Hi again, everybody. I am here to go over Module 1 with you. So this is our first actual class lecture. I wouldn't call it a lecture so much as I would an overview of the materials that I have given you for the week to learn about Module 1, which is discussing service quality and Net Promoter Score. So here I am on our normal Moodle page, as it should look when you log into this class on Moodle. Logging past my first two videos and all of the resources and right into Module 1. So you can see here Module 1, the topic of the week is service quality and NPS. This is a graphic related to NPS, which you will understand more when you watch the videos that I have posted for you. You know what? I have to go out of your view and into my own because as of the time that this video is being made, you cannot see what I have posted for you for Module 1. But I can. So this is my view. So you will see here on Moodle what we have for Module 1. Again, this graphic here, this related to NPS. Your assignments. The PowerPoint discussion I posted here, which I'm about to go into, and then the resources that I've posted that you need to go over as well. So again, my purpose in this is not to give a lecture so much as to explain the resources I have given to you. Typically in a face-to-face class, if I had a PowerPoint, I would have time to ask the students questions and go over main concepts, etc. In this scenario, I don't get to ask you questions live, and you also have this online time to do the reading yourself, etc. So what I am going to do is start with this PowerPoint scenario here, open that up, and go over any points that might not be self-explanatory, and points that might bring up additional questions here. So let's go into viewing the slideshow. I will say, oops, that typically, again, if I were to make a PowerPoint for an in-person class, it wouldn't have a lot of too many bullets on it and not too many words. But in this scenario, you guys need more sources than you would typically, because I won't be here to explain all of it for you. So I did make it a little bit more wordy than I typically would so that you have all the information that you need. So obviously this is the cover talking about quality as it relates to service. As I do in all my PowerPoint lectures, I have written down the objectives for you so you know where you are in the slide. This is not a very long presentation, but in this presentation I plan to go over each of these bullets, define what quality is, discuss the importance of quality, the benefits of quality, how managing quality and services is different and in many cases more difficult, the challenges for that service industry, the total service package, as we call it in the industry, and then a concept called total quality management, which is the main concept that almost everything we're going to go over in this class is based on. And then the results of what is often called TQM. So total quality management is referred to in the industry as TQM. So first, we would define quality. Again, I don't want to read all this for you. It is your responsibility to go back into the PowerPoint on your own and decipher all the information, use the resources, etc. But first, as it was related to the service industry, it said in 1979, Crosby defined quality as, at its most basic, it's defined as conforming to requirements. Sorry for the pause. I have a sleeping baby who's making some noise on his monitor. Okay, so at the most basic point, we're talking about conforming to requirements. And in this case, we would be talking about the requirements of the consumer, right? What are they requiring or hoping for, asking for, etc., in order to give their business? And by conforming it to those requirements or requests, desires, etc., of the consumer, that is what we would originally call quality. Um, and then later on in 1986, Deming defined it as meeting the present and future needs of the consumer. So you can see that this future piece was added here, that we're not just talking about the requirements of the consumer anymore, but we're talking about the needs of the consumer that maybe they don't even know they need yet. This is illustrated very well in the world of technology. If you think about your smartphones, for example, oftentimes Apple, for example, or Samsung will anticipate what the consumer might want or need that they don't know that they want or need yet. Or maybe they don't think they need it yet until the producer has come up with the ideas, and then eventually the consumer feels that they need those specific components. So now we've gone from just the basic quality to conforming to what people are asking for, to also providing what they're not asking for yet. And then the current definition is the totality of features and characteristics of a product or service that bears on its ability to satisfy stated or implied needs. So the implied needs does refer back to future needs, but it also is in present day. So implied meaning if I'm purchasing a cell phone, right? An implied need is that I would need to make phone calls, send text messages, etc. I'm going to go back one slide here. Those could be stated needs, but this day and age, everyone assumes that, right? An implied need might also mean I need the ability to have applications on my phone, to use the internet, to use Wi-Fi, etc. So both stated needs and implied needs, as well as present and future. So why is it important? In our industry, research suggests that quality is now the chief market differentiator and source of competitive advantage for many firms. This is not just hospitality, and this is not just service quality. So we're talking about quality in general is the one thing that typically sets one company apart from another and creates a competitive advantage for that company. Service quality in particular now represents the difference between success and failure for many businesses, specifically those in the hospitality industry. And here is a term I want you to remember: the lifetime value of a consumer. We're going to talk more about this in future modules, but it's important to remember that we're not just talking about the value of a consumer as they exist at the moment, the person who is coming in to buy groceries at your grocery store this one time. We're talking about the person who may continue to use your grocery store for as long as they own or rent a home in that neighborhood, for example. So we're talking about more than just the value of that one-time purchase, but the lifetime value of that consumer who may go back to that store 50, 100, 200 times. And it's important to keep that in mind when we're talking about the value of quality beyond just the one purchase. So one of the important things, and you're going to discuss this actually this week in your paper, is the blend of both tangible and intangible elements in the hospitality industry. And this is one of the things that makes it unique. It makes the service industry unique compared to industries that are based entirely around product. So we do have product in our industry. For example, when you rent a hotel room, you are renting the room with the bed, the mini fridge, or whatever else comes in that room. But you are also paying for a service, right? you're paying to be treated like you are in a home away from home, for example. If you just went to a hotel and got your own key, went to your room and left, in many cases, although there are some new properties who do try this, in many cases, most consumers would not feel like they got their money's worth because they didn't get the service component, they didn't get the intangibles that often comes along with the service industry. So, dealing with those intangibles um, that often mean more than just the bed, it can mean an employee's attitude or a feeling of being welcomed. Those are all intangible aspects to the service that, although maybe one might say, I'm just paying for a bed, but they are actually paying for that service that comes along with it, makes it more difficult. And we'll talk in a few moments about the four components to that intangibility um, piece that make the service industry different and oftentimes more difficult when it comes to creating quality standards that can be set um, standard throughout the industry or standard throughout a company, for example. So, in the service industry, we are primarily directed at satisfying consumers' needs, and that's the definition of service quality, essentially. And now that service quality is the chief differentiator in satisfying these needs, we have to provide it, right? Because if we don't provide it, our competition will. And then here is another term that I want you to keep in mind that is used throughout the hospitality industry that you should know and understand. And it seems like a relatively easy term. We've probably used it throughout our lifetime, but the term delight in the hospitality industry means essentially going above and beyond what the expectations are of the consumer. So, expectation is another key word I want you guys to hang on to throughout this semester because that's what you're actually measuring, especially when you do your service quality audit. You do that pre-survey. You're measuring the expectation of the consumer, not what they've received, what they expect to receive, excuse me. So when a consumer expects something and they get exactly what they expect, they're satisfied, right? When you expect to receive something, you get exactly what you're expecting. I'm satisfied. I'm happy. Somebody asked me about my experience, I'll probably tell them, yep, it was just what I expected, right? However, if you go above that, if you expect one thing and you receive something well above what you expected, then that's what we call delight. And when a consumer has been delighted, that's where you'll see high NPS scores, which we haven't talked about NPS yet, but we are talking about in this module, and you'll see that in the videos that I've given you. When you see higher NPS scores and higher likelihood of customers becoming loyal. So the idea is that we're not just satisfying those guests. We want to delight them because what does a delighted guest do? When somebody asks them about an experience, they don't say, it's what I expected. They say, let me tell you about this experience that I just had. Let me tell you about, I came to this hotel and when I was checking in, I was telling them that I wasn't feeling well. And lo and behold, 15 minutes after I checked in, somebody knocked on my door with a Sprite and a sleeve of saltines, for example. That's something that costs that hotel, pennies, but that could potentially delight a consumer to the extent that that's a story that they will tell over and over again to their friends. That's something that they will always think back on when they're considering what hotel should I book when I'm in this city, or what hotel chain should I go with when I'm traveling. Just these sometimes tiny and sometimes very large experiences can be what delights the consumer. But the delight is what we're aiming for. That is typically that 9 and 10 on the NPS score, and it is typically what leads to customer loyalty. And so we're going to talk about all of the benefits that come along with increasing service quality in a particular hospitality organization. So first, let's talk about what the benefits of quality are. And I'm going to skim through these again. It's your responsibility to go through this PowerPoint, but I do want to hit on some of the major points. We've already talked about how it's a competitive differentiator. And obviously, one of the most obvious benefits, I think, are improving the image of that particular property or that particular company. So when we're improving the quality of what we do, whether that's the quality of a product or the quality of a service. When we do that, in most cases, especially if it's marketed, then we are improving the image as well because people see it as, having made improvements, which again, that improves the image to the outside consumer. It minimizes price sensitivity. So price sensitivity is something that is actually disregarded by loyal consumers. So it doesn't necessarily mean minimizes price sensitivity to everyone. But if you have loyal consumers, it does minimize price sensitivity, which you have somebody, who has become a loyal consumer of Zappos. We'll talk about Zappos later in the semester as well. So a consumer who knows I like to only buy my shoes on Zappos because they have really great return policies, they have great customer service. It's the only place I'll shop for my shoes. So, barring any outside factors like a extreme time commitment, where we need to get the shoes by today, for example, that consumer is likely to shop at Zappos with or without a higher price range than what they could find by buying those same shoes at DSW. So even though they know they're more expensive through this particular company, they are willing to go, at least to an extent, spend more money or not even compare what the prices are. So without even looking online to see who has cheaper prices, I automatically go to this particular company and buy my product. That is because I'm a loyal customer, and that's what loyal customers do. It's not because I think I'm a loyal customer, so now I need to only go to this company. It is oftentimes without thought. This is the only company I want to shop with, so I'm going to go there and I'm going to buy what it is I'm looking for through this particular company. It improves profitability. That's one of the main reasons why it improves profitability, right? If you have consumers who are less price sensitive, then it improves profitability. There are many other reasons, and I want you guys to actually spend some time thinking about the other ways that profitability is improved. But if we go all the way back to the beginning of the line, and next week we're going to talk about the service profit chain. And the beginning of the service profit chain begins with your internal customer. And this is, again, another term I want you to keep in mind. Your internal customer is not what we typically think of as a customer, but those are the employees of our agency. So our internal customers is where service quality begins. And the process begins with how we treat our internal customers. So if we're treating our internal customers, the service profit chain, which we will talk about in more detail next week, basically says that if we're treating our internal customers well, they're going to treat our external customers, which is the normal customer that we think about, well. And those customers are going to be satisfied or hopefully delighted. And by doing that, we're going to improve profitability. So thinking about all the ways that we're doing that is one of the ways is to treat your internal customers well, to make them feel appreciated, empowered, like they have benefits with the company. And we're not always talking about benefits like pay rate and medical care. We might be talking about the benefit of working with colleagues who feel the same value in their company, or who they feel like they are on the same wavelength with, have a lot in common with, for example. So there's many different ways that you can look at benefits, but when you're improving the internal service quality, you often have less turnover, and many of you know that turnover is a real issue in our industry. We have the highest rates of turnover of any industry. And so if you are improving that internal service quality, oftentimes you are improving your turnover rates, which would actually mean making those turnover rates lower. And in doing that, we are also increasing profitability, because it's expensive to look for new employees, to hire new employees, to train new employees, to wait however long it takes for that new employee to be able to fill the same shoes as the old employee. Those things are expensive. So when we're decreasing our retention rate, we're also increasing potentially our profits. So there are many, many ways that we increase profit by increasing internal service quality and external service quality. So I want you to think about other ways in which you can improve profitability through service quality. Enhancing our reputation is another benefit. We talked about an improved image earlier. So by improving your image, you're typically enhancing that reputation, which could attract more consumers. Improving staff morale, going back to what I was talking about with internal customer service quality, reducing costs, which again, looking back at that, improving profitability. I want you guys to also think about ways, how do you reduce costs by improving your service quality? You might think about that as the opposite, right? If I need to improve quality, we're going to have to spend money. So how is it possible that by doing that, we're actually reducing those costs? Um, so I want you to start thinking along those lines, deductive, and those are things I want you to talk about in your paper this week as well. Increasing productivity. So if you think about, for example, going back to what I said about having internal customers who are more satisfied, um, statistically showing when one is satisfied in their job, they are more productive as well. And you can relate that to, all of you have probably had jobs where you either really loved your job and worked really hard at it because you loved it, or maybe you hated your job and you did the bare minimum, right? You did what you had to do when you were clocked in, and when you were clocked out, you went home and you didn't think about it again until you had to be back there the next day. So that's an example. Also, if you go to a restaurant and you have a waiter or a waitress that hates their job, it's typically pretty easy to see, right? It's not a difficult thing to surmise when somebody doesn't like what they're doing, and because you're the consumer and you can see it, it comes out in the quality of the service that you're receiving as well. So, if you have a job that you love, you're more willing to say, hey, you know what, let me help you out with that, or let me do a little bit more this week, or, I can stay later and help with this new problem that we're having. So, productivity is typically increased in that scenario. It encourages greater employee participation in the same way that I was talking about productivity. It gives these employees value in what they're doing. So when you feel value in what you're doing, you typically are more willing to participate in both internal and external um, activities. For example, you may be more willing to join the hotel softball team or whatever it is, which increases and improves collegiality, which then further improves, most often, further improves that internal customer service, which then, as I said, would improve the external customer service ultimately. It brings about continuous improvements. Obviously, if we're improving our quality, we're going to continue to do that, and that's what you'll see through total quality management. Is not one process that has a beginning and an end. It's a continuous process, and most obviously, it increases customer satisfaction. So, in the service industry, you can see here. I'm going to move my little face real quick. Managing quality and services. So, this is where we're going to talk about these four components that really illustrate how the service industry is different than the product industry and what sort of challenges we have to deal with. So, kind of small print. But the first component is called intangibility. I think you guys probably know what that means. But intangible, something you cannot touch. And it's also something that can't be inventoried. It's not something that we could put in a storage closet and sell later. It's something that you can't touch, that you can't feel. You might be able to smell it, and maybe you could feel it depending on what you mean by the term feel, right? But it also can be, for example, create emotion. So the intangible pieces make the service industry very difficult. You can't put an exact number on an experience most often the way you can on a product. So that's something when we are creating a total quality management product, it's not the same way we could do on an assembly line with a product. It's something that we have to feel. And you can't feel that as a corporation. You can feel that as individuals, right? So these are all things that we have to consider. The second component is called perishability. Perishability means that if it's not used, it, it goes unused forever. So a good example of that would be a hotel room, for example. If it's a perishable product or a non-perishable product, for example, a can of green beans on the grocery store shelf. If somebody doesn't buy that can of green beans today, they can buy it tomorrow, pending the expiration date doesn't come up, right? But for the most part, we can put it back on that shelf and somebody can purchase it tomorrow. In the hospitality industry, we have a lot of services that are perishable. So, a hotel room is an example of that. Yes, that hotel room will be there tomorrow, but we can never sell tomorrow that room for tonight. The same thing with that seat on the airplane. If that seat sits empty and that flight takes off, we can never get back the revenue for that one seat on that one flight. Now, we can sell that seat tomorrow to a different consumer, but we can't get back the seat for December 23rd, 2017. We don't get that piece of time back. So that's another difficult challenge that we have with the services industry. Excuse me. The third component is called heterogeneity, which means that it can't be reproduced. We can't guarantee that what we promise will be delivered, and a lot of times these things depend on the consumer, the employee, etc. So what I mean by when I say something can't be reproduced, we can try, and we do in the hospitality industry, but this is the difficult component. I cannot deliver the exact same service that Jesus can deliver because we're different people. We have different voices. We look different. We have different experiences. We have different education and different training, and we might be in different circumstances, right? I might have a consumer come in to check into my hotel who's had a great day and wants to tell me about it and is excited. And Jesus might have somebody come into his hotel who just got their reservation lost at another property, who just drove through a rainstorm for 6 hours. In those cases, what that consumer receives is going to be different every time. Not just because it's Jesus and me, but because those circumstances are different, because the property is different, the consumer is different, the person who's delivering the service is different. These are things that we cannot control, but we can try, and we do try. So when we are making quality standards, we try to recreate these circumstances so that everybody can have as similar a circumstance as possible. While we don't want everything to be so similar that we are missing out on making these experiences special for our consumers, but we do want them to be similar. This is why, especially in the US, our consumers are really driven towards chain properties. You don't see that as much when you go, for example, to Europe, but our culture in the US is really driven toward chain properties. The consumer is much more likely to go to a Hampton Inn than they are to go to Joe's Night Inn. Or they're much more likely to go to a Chili's or an Applebee's than they are to go to Bob's Steakhouse. Although I might think Bob's Steakhouse sounds really great, we trust what we know. And I don't know Bob's Steakhouse. I see the sign on the road, I see their website on my cell phone as I'm Googling it. But I don't know, and I can't guarantee that when I get to Bob's Steakhouse, I'm going to like it. But I know Applebee's. And even if I don't like it, I know it. I know what I can expect. I know what their quality standards typically are. I know what kind of food they serve. There's nothing for guessing. So because we know what those are, we are much more likely to go to what we know. So we need a piece of this heterogeneity to be involved in everything that we do, even though we know that we can't control for that. We have to try because consumers need to know that they can trust that their experience at the Hampton Inn in New Mexico is going to be the same experience that they have at the Hampton Inn in Illinois. And that is what we try to do in the hospitality industry is create that sense of comfort and that sense of knowing for our consumers. But we can't do it the way we can with the person who, the company who manufactures televisions, right? They have an assembly line and a process and a product that can come out exactly identical 99.99% of the time. We don't have that ability because of heterogeneity in our industry. So all we can do is create processes that strive to make things as similar as possible for each experience and each consumer. And then the last piece of the puzzle is simultaneity. So simultaneity means what it sounds like, simultaneous, right? The product, or excuse me, the service is produced the same moment that it is received. So unlike that TV that rolls off the assembly line and is inspected and then wrapped up and sent to the Best Buy where somebody buys it, our service is our product. And our service is produced the moment that we give it, and it can't be taken back. When I welcome somebody into my hotel property, welcome Mr. Johnson. It's so nice to see you again. Thanks for coming back for your second week in a row. We've arranged for your room to have the pillow that you like, etc., etc. That cannot be taken back. Now, I can correct it. I can try to change it, but I can't take it away. So that is something that is a struggle for the service industry as well. It is not the same product, and it also cannot be taken back. It is delivered the exact moment that it comes out of our mouth, or that we are pointing in the direction that somebody should be going, or that we are complimenting somebody on their blouse. Whatever it is, that piece of the service is actually produced and consumed at the exact same moment. The trick, or the challenge, I should say, in all of these is that employees and service providers affect the product and service outcome in all of these scenarios. Whereas when we're talking about just a product, that is, again, produced in advance, it's inspected, it's produced on an assembly line typically, and it's rolled out, and everybody gets the exact same thing no matter how they purchase it. If they buy it online, if they buy it in Best Buy, if they buy it from their friend, it's the same. But in our scenario with these 4 components here, these are reasons that not only can we not predict and control the way we can with a product, but that employees are actually a piece of that product, of that service that's coming out. And that is something that we have to know, that every single person is different, every scenario is different, every consumer is different, every provider is different. And these are things that we can't control for, but we have to try. And in that scenario, we can't mass produce the way you can in a factory. So these are the 4 components I want you to concentrate most on when you're writing your paper for this week. I'm going to move my face again here. Challenges for the service industry. I'm just going to hit on the major pieces here, but defining quality is a major challenge for us because it means different things to different people. So we don't have a spectrum the way you would with the clarity of a television screen, for example. So what is the spectrum that people are gauging quality on? And it means different things to different industries. But how do we define what quality means in a service industry? It's a challenge. How do we design new services and test them when we have those 4 components that I just talked about that make them unpredictable in many cases and much harder to duplicate? How do we communicate and maintain that consistent image? So as I talked about earlier, where our consumers, especially in the U.S., are drawn to consistency, drawn to what they know, even if that's not the best possible option for them, even if they know I'm going to buy this product, or I'm going to frequent this, or I'm going to go to this establishment, even though I know it's not my favorite, but I know what it is. We know that that's what our consumers are drawn to, so we have to create a consistent image. We have to have consistency throughout, especially when we have multiple brand entities. So how do we maintain that consistent image when we don't have a specific product? We have a service that has to be duplicated, but can't be 100% duplicated. How do we accommodate fluctuating demand? This is seen throughout our industry. In many cases, for example, when we're talking about in New England, fluctuating demand is very common in the hotel industry because of seasonality, right? So depending on where in New England we are, the heaviest season actually for tourism is the fall. It's beautiful in the fall. We have the great foliage. We have a lot of tourists, and we actually have a decent amount of tourism in the winter because of things like ski resorts. But that's more location driven. So spring and fall are the heaviest travel seasons in New England, followed by summer and then the downtime of winter. But depending on where the location is in New England, winter can be an uptime for example, areas where there are ski resorts. But how do we accommodate for fluctuating demand? What does that ski resort do in the summertime to earn an income? Maybe they don't. Maybe they shut down. Maybe they find a new resource like hosting weddings on their mountaintop. So how do we accommodate fluctuating demand in a city like Boston that is very sports driven? When one or two or even three of the major sports are out of season, that affects greatly the tourism industry, the lodging industry, and even the restaurant industry around those particular areas. So, how do we accommodate for that? Motivating and sustaining employee commitment. As I said before, we have a very high turnover rate in the hospitality industry. So, how do we decrease that turnover rate? And then finding a balance between standardization and personalization. So, I talked before about how standardization is very important in our industry. People need to know that they can count on the service that they're going to receive. But personalization is also important. People need to feel special. And that's where we hit that note of delight, right? When people feel like I'm not just a number, I am an important part. And that's why you hear a lot of hotels, for example, address guests by their full name when they come in. That's why you hear a lot of hotels who keep databases of what their consumers' preferences are. And you see a lot of the similar things happening with restaurants and by use. A lot of times these are used by companies when they create loyalty cards. Not necessarily to produce loyalty, but a lot of times it produces data for us that tells us what these consumers like so we can make them feel special, make that experience personalized for them. So we have to balance between, do we personalize the experience or do we standardize the experience? And typically the answer is somewhere in between. And then ensuring the delivery of consistent quality. So I've talked about that a few moments ago, but it's very important to keep in mind that consistency is difficult when we're talking about so many uncontrollable factors, like the person who's delivering the service, the experience that's happening, right? The weather. All of these things can affect the delivery and the consistency of the quality. So how do we account for that? And then the total service package is beyond just the service that's being given. These are all components of what service is being received by our consumers. So these are factors. I'm not going to go deep into each one of them. I want you to research them on your own. But the supporting facility, often called Servicescape, which we will get deep into in one of our modules down the road, we'll talk specifically about Servicescape. It's something I want you to keep in mind when you are doing your service audit, specifically when you're doing your secret shop. But these are the physical plant, the physical pieces that control for what service is being given. So while a stay at a hotel is primarily a service, that bed is part of the Servicescape, the physical plant. The golf clubs that are used at the country club are part of the service that are being received. I'm going to move my face again here. The facilitating goods, as I mentioned, the golf clubs, for example, the things that we have to have in order to receive the service that we're paying for. The food at a restaurant is a good example of facilitating goods. There we go. Information. So this is most often information that we use in order to make the service work. So the PMS systems that are used at a restaurant, for example, the reservations systems that are used at a hotel, a guest history that tells us how many times a guest has stayed with this particular brand or at this particular property. Those are all pieces of information that we use in order to provide the services. And then the explicit services are benefits that are readily observable by the senses. So intrinsic features like the quality of the meal, the attitude of the waiter. These are not things that we read about when we go to the website for the restaurants. These are not things that we plan for, that we actually feel are part of what we're paying for, but they are. As a consumer, it's part of what we're paying for. So the attitude of the wait staff, for example, would be what we would call the explicit services. It's not something that we typically advertise. It's not typically part of the experience unless you're going to a place like Dick's Last Resort where they actually bill that as part of what they give. Typically, that would be considered an explicit service. And then we have implicit service. So these services are psychological benefits. For example, they're things that they're intangibles. Not the parking lot, but how safe you feel in the parking lot because of the lighting. Not the office. You can see these examples. Not the office that one is given, but how private the office makes someone feel if they're in a private space, for example. So these are more psychological than they are physical. So total quality management, we're nearing the end of this presentation here. So the bottom line performance will take care of itself if the organization is committed to and practices quality effort. So basically, the whole premise of total quality management is that if we pay attention, excuse me, if we pay attention to and are committed to the practices of quality, then the bottom line will take care of itself. We don't have to worry about whether or not we're going to make a profit. If we concern ourselves with the quality of our products and the quality of our services, we will make a profit. That's the whole idea behind total quality management. So the other important factors are to consider is you need to know your customer base. And a lot of times when we talk about our customer base, we think of the consumers who are buying our product or service. And that is a component of your customer base, but it's not your entire customer base. So you're also thinking about your internal customer base. Again, that's your employees. These are the people who are delivering the services for you. Your external customer base, these are people who are purchasing your product or services, and your financial customer base. So this would be, for example, investors in your company. All three of these components have to be satisfied, happy, and hopefully delighted in order for you to be running a successful business. Because if your investors aren't happy, but your consumers are, and your investors pull out their money, then you still have a problem, right? If your investors are happy, but your consumers aren't, there's still an issue. If both of those are happy, but your internal consumers are not happy, then you still have a problem. So the key is balancing those three sets of customers and making sure that they are all happy, they all have a high service quality, and they are hopefully being delighted by going above and beyond, by the company going above and beyond. We would be ongoing identifying our expectations. So again, this is not a one-stop shop. This is not where we fix some problems and we're done with total quality management. It's a continuous process. And as part of that, we have to regularly monitor how these services are delivered and how expectations are perceived. And then we have to balance the expectations from these three groups that I just talked about. So this is just a graph that shows how this works for the total quality management system. So we talk about the beginning step is improving quality. When we improve quality, costs decrease. If you remember, I asked you to think about this in particular. How do costs decrease? By improving quality instead of increase. So how can these factors be affected by improving quality? Once these costs decreases, your customer base then increases because of the improved quality. You're staying competitive in the industry, and then ultimately you're providing empowerment for your employees and satisfaction for your consumers. So I want you to also concentrate on this word empowerment here. It's one that we'll keep touching back on, but it's an important part of having internally satisfied customers. When we empower our internal consumers, they are typically much more satisfied with their job, and they also can do it better. So if you think about a situation in which you have ever been in any scenario where you've been unhappy with a service that you've received, say you at a restaurant, you're unhappy with the meal and you call your waiter over, you say, my meal came out cold, and the waiter says, there's nothing I can do for you, I'll have to get my manager. So you wait, the manager is busy, manager comes over, or worse, the manager doesn't come over. Maybe the waiter comes back and says, you know what, he had to leave, he's not in tonight, he'll give you a call tomorrow, or can you call him later? These things are not only extremely frustrating for the consumer, but they're also very frustrating for that waiter. For example, the waiter who has zero power to resolve any issues, that can be disempowering, right? If you've ever been in a situation where you felt like you couldn't do anything to improve a scenario because somebody didn't trust you with what it takes in order to improve a situation, you would understand that that's devaluing your place in that organization. So by empowering our employees to be able to resolve problems as they come up, and some hotels, you'll read later in the semester about a case study about the Four Seasons. The Four Seasons, I'm sorry, the Four Seasons would be, or Ritz-Carlton would be very angry at me for making that mistake. The case study is about the Ritz-Carlton. And they actually have a great policy empowering their employees to use a specific amount of money. That amount has changed over time, but at one point it was $2,000 an employee had to resolve any issue. Any issue, they could spend up to $2,000 to resolve it. Now, did they spend that $2,000 on every consumer or even very many of them? No. But if they had an issue, they knew that I don't have to go ask my manager, I don't have to call the general manager, I don't have to get permission or go through our training books to see if this is something I can do. I know that I can find out what the problem is and fix it right away. The consumer is happier, and also the internal employee is much happier because they feel like they are trusted. This company chose them and trained them for a reason, and they can resolve the problems as they see fit. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about employee empowerment. And providing that empowerment leads to greater satisfaction for the employees and ultimately greater satisfaction for the consumer. So that is it with those slides. I want you to go back through them and research each point more specifically. And if you see here, since this is our first module, I'll walk you through the process that you're going to go through. Again, this graph here is related to NPS, which we'll get to further down the line. But these first three things you'll see on every module. So the first one is your discussion forum. If I click on it, you can see the instructions for this week's discussion forum. So all you'll do is you'll read these instructions, and from that you'll create your first discussion topic. You'll hit here, add a new discussion topic, and you'll write your answer to these three questions or prompts. So this week you're going to initially be introducing yourself and talking about your educational and professional background. You're going to talk about what companies you're hoping to do your audit on, and then you're actually going to answer these questions about NPS, which you will have gotten the information from the resources I provided. So that's how you add the discussion topic. From there, you will be able to comment on your classmates' discussion topics as well. So that's the first thing here. The second thing is the critical analysis paper. So if you click on that this week, you can see the instructions that I've given you based on the PowerPoint that I just went over and the other resources that I've provided for you, the answers that I want you to provide in your paper that is due this week on Sunday night. Oops. And then the last one is your weekly journal entries. So if you click on here, you can just upload. Oops, that's what I see. You don't see that. You'll see a place where you can just click and upload your 2 or more journal entries from the week. Again, that should be in one document, not 2 or more documents. So one document that should have the 2 or more journal entries from the week, just upload those here. And then there is the PowerPoint that we just went through that you'll be going back through. And here are 4 resources I provided for you for this week. So those resources are all related to the Net Promoter Score, NPS. So these are a couple of videos that explain what Net Promoter Score is and give a little bit more of an in-depth description on how it works. And then here is an article called The One Number That You Need to Grow. This article will discuss why NPS matters and why statistically we found that it works for the hospitality industry rather than some of the more complex methods like ServQual that we'll also be talking about. And then there is a video. It's not really a video. It's a video on YouTube, but it's really audio of a woman who is doing a conference call on NPS, on how restaurants can benefit from NPS. So I want you to listen to that entire thing, read through these articles, and watch these videos, plus doing the research that I've given you to start with on the TQM, Total Quality Management slideshow that I've just gone through. Use all these resources and then begin your discussion forums, writing your paper and your journal entries. So that is it for this week. Next week, we will start talking about the service profit chain, and I will have another video uploaded for you to go over all of those resources and the assignments for next week. Good luck, and as always, let me know if you have any questions.